Well, the 2021 season has finally mercifully come to an end. Arkansas defeats Penn State in the Outback Bowl 24-10. Once again, I am Tim Aiden, Red Redder Black Sheep Diaries, joined by my colleague Marty Leap. Marty, how you doing?
Not too bad. I think it is kind of bad or whatever this may be to say. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way. I'm sure there's probably people in the Lash building and on the staff and on the roster that feels this way. It's kind of nice to just have the season over with. Um, you have seasons like this where things start out so promising and just you hit a point where things start to snowball on you. And that's how the season was for Penn State. So ultimately, it's kind of nice to just have it over with, get into the offseason, everyone kind of take a deep breath, press restart, and let's try and get some questions answered between now and September 3rd.
And we'll certainly get into our share of offseason discussion later on in the show. Right now, though, talk a bit about today's Outback Bowl. This is a game that it seemed a good portion of the Penn State fan base was not feeling optimistic about, considering that several key players opted out. On the offensive side, Jahan Dotson, inarguably the team's biggest weapon on the offense, sat out the game. And then on defensive side, you had about almost half the starters missing, especially up front. Arnold Ebiketie, team's best pass rusher, and Derek Tangelo, their best defensive tackle, both opt out. And then the linebacking core, both Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith announced they were sitting out to focus on the NFL draft. Same with Jaquan Brisker at safety. And so, going in, I don't know about you, but there's sort of a part of me that felt with the way Arkansas loved to pound the rock. It wasn't unfathomable that they could certainly light up a scoreboard. Now, thankfully, that didn't happen. They put up 24 points in total, and part of that credit goes to Jair Brown, who stepped up with a couple interceptions, including one early on when Arkansas was scoreless. Arkansas was driving to score a touchdown, and he picks him off in the end zone. But also, I don't know about you, I was very pleasantly surprised with how the D line held up despite missing their two best players. Nick Tarburton really had himself a game, and even Jesse Luketa being forced into the Mike linebacker role also stepped up. As did Curtis Jacobs. But in Smith Filbert, I saw him chase down KJ Jefferson a couple times to bring him down for a loss or a sack. So there are definitely some positives to be taken away despite missing so many guys due to opt-outs. Unfortunately, though, I guess as a story, kind of the story of the season, defense did, I think you could say defense did enough to give him a chance, but the offense could not hold up its end of the bargain. Sean Clifford, once again, hit or miss, and did more missing than hitting in this one. He did have a nice touchdown strike to Keandre Lambert Smith early on, but he also overthrew Theo Johnson late in the first half for what should have been a touchdown, which would have had him up 17-7 at the half. And, we could have had maybe a more interesting finish to this one, being down 24-17 instead of 24-10 late in the fourth quarter. And then, running game, you had their moments of Noah Cain and Kevon Lee. They both broke off some big runs. And, frankly, it's a low bar, but the run game actually looked better than it had for most of the season. But there seemed to be a lack of attempting to run the ball when they seemed to have the hot hand there. But whatever it was, and of course, it kind of all comes back to the offensive line, just, inconsistent. Sean Clifford was running for his life a little too much, more than we'd like to see. And it just, in the end, it just all kind of had a snowballing effect and led to only 10 points for the offense, which is really not going to get it done against any opponent. Let's be fair. Marty, what are your big takeaways from this?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, especially, I'll start with the defense. I said this at halftime, both on my personal Twitter and on the Black Sheep Diaries Twitter, that if you consider the opt-outs and injuries, the team they were playing and the type of offense Arkansas wanted to run, I think you could argue the first half was the best half of defense this team played maybe all season. You're down when you consider Jesse Luketa was playing Mike linebacker instead of defensive end, you were down at least your top 6 defensive linemen from preseason camp. And I thought the young defensive linemen, for the most part, looked really good. You mentioned Nick Tarburton. I thought this might have been the best game of his career. Smith Vilbert. It was funny because in our Black Shoe Diary Slack channel, Clay and I both said Vilbert looked, he looked a little stiff out there. Maybe he didn't belong. And boom, very next play gets a sack. Had a sack later in the game. He struggled a little bit reading some option plays, but give me that is what you're struggling with, because that's something with practice you can learn and get better at very easily. I thought Keziah Izzard played a good game, but he has most of the season. I thought, Vanover flashed at times up front. So that defensive line definitely played really well. I think really well when you consider who they didn't have and the type of offense they were facing. And as for linebacker, Jesse Luketa, credit to him. Nothing's been official yet, but everyone believes this was his last game before going to the draft. And he played probably the best game he ever has as a linebacker at Penn State. So a good way for him to finish his career. Jair Brown, one of my takeaways in my post-game takeaway article I always do for Black Shoe Diaries, I said Jair Brown is going to be an all-conference level safety next year. He's a very good building block for this defense. And I think what was most frustrating for me in this game is offensively, man, it was a lot of the bad Sean Clifford that we've seen over the years. To his credit, he did a great job using his legs, keeping plays alive, but man, like that interception he threw in the second half, for example, 1st and goal at the 10, and you're scrambling out of there, man, just chuck the ball out of there. Throw it away and live to play another day. He rushed the throw. It was a terrible decision. Way underthrown, got picked off. You mentioned when he missed the wide open Theo Johnson for what should have been a touchdown. He hits that throw. They go up 17-7. Who knows where this game goes? So, and there was a drop in the third quarter that I know Malik Mega took a lot of beef for, and he should have caught the ball, but it was slightly underthrown also by Clifford. A little bit better throw out in front of him, and Mega probably doesn't drop it. But it was not a good game for Sean Clifford. And the other thing that frustrated me offensively was, you mentioned Kevon Lee and Noah Cain, both of whom looked maybe the best out all season. Kevon Lee, on his first 5 touches of the game, had 51 total yards and had 40 yards on Penn State's touchdown drive, and then he didn't touch the ball again in the fourth quarter. Like, it just made no sense to me that you had Lee and Cain starting to get some momentum and you didn't feed them the rock a little more. But yeah, all in all, if you look at this game solely on the perspective of looking ahead to next season, there were definitely a lot of positives, because you saw, like Ola Fashanu and Lyndon Tangwall, for example, on the offensive line, they had some freshman moments today, but for the most part, you didn't notice them, which is good. Those are 2 guys Penn State really plans to build around up front moving forward. I thought Keandre Lambert-Smith really had his coming out party, and Parker Washington showed today he can be wide receiver 1. So once you throw in Mitchell Tinsley, the Western Kentucky transfer, you should be pretty set at receiver next year. We mentioned that defensive line. The secondary had a lot of young guys playing. Keaton Ellis, Johnny Dixon, Jalen Reed, Kalen King. I thought they all played well. So there are definitely some positives to take away from this game. As frustrating of a way this was to finish what was an insanely frustrating season, there were definitely positives to take away from this game for the Nittany Lions. I just think heading into the offseason, there's going to be a lot of questions that need answered on this offense still, primarily the offensive line and also quarterback, because it's just, we all know Sean Clifford's coming back. Penn State probably still better with Clifford coming back than not with the current state of the quarterback room, not due to talent or a lack of talent, but due to the fact you would have 3 freshmen in there competing otherwise. But man, I don't know. It's just games like today are the ones where you look at it and you really do wonder, does Clifford maybe lower the ceiling of this program overall a bit? But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, all in all, if you look at this game and almost treat it like a spring practice more so than a bowl game, which is essentially what it became for Penn State, there are definitely a lot of positives to take away, because the young guys who you need to step up and play a big role next year, for the most part, I thought all played pretty well in this game.
Yeah, and I definitely noticed those young guys stepping up. I guess I know you didn't want to do this, but I did, want to bring it back to Sean Clifford, because I have said in the Black Shoe Slack channel and on social media, I was glad they're bringing Cliff back for a 6th year, because of all just because of how young the quarterback room would be otherwise if he wasn't there. There were definitely moments where I was second guessing myself for thinking that today, but end of the day, I figure it's good to have that veteran presence. Now, what I'm thinking though is I hope, this is what I think what we're going to see more of for spring practice and blue white game are the other quarterbacks, Christian Veyu, Drew Aller, and Bo Prabula. Yes, because Aller and Prabula are both enrolling in January. And so I think all three of them are gonna have their moments in the blue white. They'll have a chance to showcase their stuff in the blue white game. Because you figure Sean Clifford's only gonna play maybe one series at most, if he even plays at all in the blue white game. They may just treat him like they did with Saquon Barkley back then and just, put him in bubble wrap and, not even let him potentially take any hits. I mean, not that they allow the QBs to take hits anyway in blue white games, but you get my drift. But I'm really curious to see how the how the other three quarterbacks shape out. Because my thinking is, if say Christian Veil or Drew Aller, the anointed one, are is as good as advertised, and if we see similar struggle, we see Cliff struggling like he did today, and you wonder how long is that leash for him? Is it a bit shorter than it's been like say this year, or is it about the same? I guess I figure hopefully there'll be less hesitation to throw in another guy if Cliff is ineffective, either due just to resorting to bad habits or if he or like for a good portion this year when he was hurt.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Like, I totally agree. If you look purely at the number standpoint of your scholarship quarterbacks and where they are in terms of experience, you're definitely better off with Sean Clifford than without. But my fear is if we get into next season and we see him falling into these old habits and we see him struggling or maybe trying to play hurt, we don't see them make a change. I forget exactly how I worded it, but I said something on Twitter after the game that was kind of half sarcastic, kind of half not. But I can see it already now. Next year, it's after week 6. Penn State's coming out of a loss against Michigan. Clifford's got 8 touchdowns and 9 interceptions on the season. And James Franklin's not even considering a coach or a quarterback change. And I mean, I think that could be a realistic outcome. I mean, James Franklin will be the first person to tell you that sometimes he's loyal to a fault. And obviously, he's going to be very loyal to Sean Clifford. I mean, essentially, during the Franklin era, they've had 2 quarterbacks, Trace McSorley and now Sean Clifford. I mean, yes, you had the first years of Christian Hackenberg. But that was a little bit different, too, because he wasn't recruited by Franklin. But, Clifford's coming back for the 6th season, I'm sure. And I can understand why the coaching staff would feel some loyalty to him. But I will be curious to see, too, if we do get into that situation next year. And Penn State's schedule early on next year is pretty tough. For their first 6 games are at Auburn, at Purdue, at Michigan, and Ohio State at home. Now, that could change some because the Big Ten might make some changes to their schedule for next year. But let's say that sticks. Man, you could be looking at 2-3 losses within the first 5 or 6 games. And if that happens, and this is where it could really get tough for Penn State, like no offense to Sean Clifford, but at that point, you're obviously want to start looking more towards the future, which you want to be getting Christian Veyu and Drew Aller, Bo Prabula, whoever it may be, game reps to let them start to grow as a quarterback with eyes towards the future. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we come out next year. And this is another thing I mentioned in my takeaways article. The first 6 games of the season this year, Sean Clifford played probably the best 6-game stretch of his career until he got hurt against Iowa. So hopefully next year Clifford comes out and that's the quarterback he is all season, getting another full offseason under his belt to work with Mike Yurcich, who has a tremendous reputation working with quarterbacks, obviously, and is viewed as one of the best quarterback coaches in the country. Excuse me. So hopefully next year Clifford can come out and just be that quarterback from the get-go and be that quarterback throughout the season. And we don't have to worry about this. And hopefully next year after a bowl game, we're talking about Penn State sending Sean Clifford out with victory. But if we get into the season and Clifford is struggling, which based on his track record, there's a real possibility of that, I will be curious to see, are they willing to give any of these younger quarterbacks a chance? Because it's not a lack of talent in that room. I mean, I know we've talked about Drew Aller to no extent on here. The dude's number one quarterback in the country, number 3 player in the country. Bo Pribula is either a high 3-star or 4-star on every recruiting service and was one of the most productive quarterbacks in the history of Pennsylvania high school football. And even Christian Veilleux, he definitely showed some good things when he had the chance this year. And coming out of high school, he was an Elite 11 quarterback. He was a guy Clemson made a big run at. Like, the talent's there for him. So it's not like sometimes in the past where, I think back to the year, I think it was what would have been 2018, Trace McSorley's last year when he was banged up, but Tommy Stevens was also banged up, and you're trying to preserve Sean Clifford's red shirt. So you just kind of wrote him out. You're not going to have that problem next year. You're going to have other options. So I just hope that if they get to the point, rather it's performance-based, injury-based, or, hey, the team's got 3 or 4 losses, let's play for the future based, that we see these quarterbacks get a chance if Sean Clifford's not getting the job done.
Yeah, and I would say I'd have to agree with that. With that schedule, and we should add a caveat. That schedule is probably subject to change because we know the Big Ten is going to change some teams like home and homes around because it looks like otherwise you'd have one team playing another either at home or on the road for a 3rd straight year, which the Big Ten does not want. So that's probably could cause some changes on the calendar, which could in turn affect Penn State.
I mean, my biggest thing is I just hope they don't. I'll take any change it takes and not have to play Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back weeks because
I'm hoping.
I don't care if you're Alabama, you don't want to play Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back weeks. No team in the country wants to do that.
And if you ask me, Marty, I think it's ridiculous how the Big Ten for the longest time was scheduling games, was putting out conference schedules, 4 or 5 years in advance. I think it's ridiculous. I really think you should just come up with a new one every offseason just because the competitive balance can change, as you've seen over the years. And, what maybe it seemed like, maybe an okay slate in October can suddenly become super daunting because a couple teams on there went from mediocre to pretty good. So I feel like they should just go, like, I think the ACC and other conferences do it on, I think, just 1 or 2 years in advance.
Actually, I'm pretty sure the ACC, I could be wrong, but I think the ACC and the SEC both do it like 1 year at a time.
Yeah, that's how I hope Kevin Warren's seriously looking into that, as well as getting rid of divisions, which is something I will harp on again, just squeeze it in there. So, speaking of squeezing things in there, just real quick, those of you tuning in, watching us, I know we're broadcasting live on the main channel for Mark Rogers TV, but typically we do this show on the Penn State channel, the Big Ten channels. So if you haven't already and you like our content, hit like and smash that like and subscribe button. We really appreciate that. But yes, Marty, I had a comment here. Speaking of offense, a comment here from Weggy Ocean. Nice name. Penn State's best rusher in the year didn't even have 500 yards. Is Mike Yurcich to blame? Marty, what do you think?
I mean, I understand the frustration with Mike Yurcich that people have. I really do. But for me, it's so much deeper than that. Like first off, Yurcich has a tremendous track record. Everywhere he's been, his offense has been productive. This year, yes, Penn State was struggling to run the ball, but before Cliff got hurt, the offense was productive. And when you look at the offensive line, he was kind of handicapped by this year, and you factor in there being a stretch of games there after the Clifford injury where teams just really didn't take the passing game seriously anymore, and they couldn't run the ball. I don't put a lot of it on Yurcich. I do think next year, regardless of what does or doesn't happen to that offensive line, you got to think the offensive line is going to be better. Like, first off, it'd be difficult not to be. And second off, I think if you put in, guys like Tangwall and Fashanu that we've talked about, maybe slide Caden Wallace to guard. I know there's multiple transfer offensive linemen. Penn State appears to be in a really good position within the portal.
Ruggs under center.
Yeah. Juice to center. That's a big one too. You got to think it's going to be better. And with running back, you get Noah Kane, who hopefully will finally be healthy. Kevon Lee, who is a pretty good back. And then you throw in Nick Singleton, National Gatorade Player of the Year, #1 running back recruit in the country, who's coming in January also. I just have a hard time to believe, are they going to be, they're not going to come out and run the ball like they did down the stretch in 2019 necessarily next year, but you got to think they're going to run the ball better just based purely on the fact it'd be difficult not to, and players are going to bring in players who can be able to move positions, players who have another year of growth in the program. You got to think things are going to be better. So I don't put that on Mike Yurcich. And there were a lot of games this year too. And today was one of these where the offense was struggling and guys were open. Like Yurcich was designing things just that wasn't being executed. Like I remember today during the game being super frustrated. There'd be plays, Arkansas secondary scrambling and guys are running around open and Cliff just didn't have time to set his feet and get the ball to them. So obviously that was a big problem against Iowa also after Clifford went out. Guys are running around open and Taquan Roberson could make throws. I think Yurcich had – I'm not going to say he necessarily had a good season. I know Mike Yurcich wouldn't tell you he had a good season, but he definitely was hurt by poor offensive line play and things kind of snowballed from there. And, just go back and watch the playoff games from yesterday. I don't care what you are, who you are, what level of football it is. If you don't have good offensive line play, you're going to struggle. And the team who has better offensive line play is going to win the football game 90% of the time, if not more. And that was Penn State's biggest issue this year. I can't put that on Mike Yurcich.
Yeah, I would have been inclined to answer the same. My understanding with Yurcich, I think his scheme has a different. I think the blocking scheme is a little different compared to what Kirk Shiraka had, or maybe even what Ricky Ronnie and Joe Moorhead had. Maybe you can fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I do. There is definitely some differences there. The Yurcich running attack, it's very similar more to kind of like that zone power. Like I would say, think back to like the Urban Meyer Florida teams. A lot of that zone power stuff he used to run. It's very similar to that with Yurcich, where with the Shiraka offense and even with the Ronnie offense, yes, there's a lot of zone blocking, but the zone schemes are definitely different. It wasn't as much of a power attack. They would look to go off tackle and that sort of thing more. And, this year with Penn State, with how much the interior offensive line struggled, if you have a coach like Mike Yurcich who wants to build his rushing attack around that power, the zone power attack in between the tackles, they just didn't have the personnel for it. That is why, I still would not roll out an offensive line coach change this offseason. A, because of the struggles of the line, and B, to let Yurcich bring in a guy who would work with his offense better, he feels. We'll see what happens. I definitely know there's been some rumblings that James Franklin is not happy with the performance of Phil Troutwine, which, I'm sure Phil Troutwine is not happy either with his own performance this season. So we'll see what happens there. But, yeah, I definitely think that the biggest thing for Penn State this offseason is going to be fixing that offensive line. And, you can't – I don't throw that at the feet of an offensive coordinator, especially an offensive coordinator who is in year one and didn't recruit these guys. So you always got to take that in the equation too. An offensive coordinator is going to want certain body types up on that offensive line for pulling, for moving to the second level, for whatever it might be. So that's a factor also. But yeah, I don't put the struggles of the offensive line on Yurcich. I don't think you can. It's not fair to do it all.
Right. I'd be inclined to agree with that too. I mean, your O-line is subpar. I mean, it's going to severely hamper your offense. I don't care who you've got, calling plays for your team. And like I said, I think it's just by default. I can't see how this line is not going to be better next year. Now, that's not going to be saying much. How much better is, if it can just even be serviceable, it would be a huge step up. I mean, if it can be like, honestly, I'm talking about like 2016 level offensive line. I mean, that wasn't exactly a great O-line by any stretch of the means. They were serviceable, though.
Yeah, and, I feel very confident in saying, and I'm sure people out there who watch Penn State a year will agree, if they would have got even serviceable offensive line play this year, probably go 9-3 at worst. You probably still beat Illinois and Iowa,
Because maybe Cliff doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, it's true. Because, you go back to the play Cliff got hurt on, he had Brenton Strange wide open for potential touchdown and just took a wallop and overthrew him. So if he doesn't get hit there, Strange catches it, walks in the end zone. It's 21-3. Clifford's not hurt. Who knows where their season goes at that point? So, yeah, with even mediocre average offensive line play this year, they would have been a completely different team. It's just the offensive line play. And I think what was so frustrating for me with it was they struggled early on. And it's like, all right, you played Wisconsin, who's one of the best front sevens in the country. You played Auburn, they're always going to have a tough front seven. But really, for me, it started with that Villanova game where they still couldn't run the ball. And you're just like, oh my God, this is not going to be good. And as the season went on, the offensive line play seemed to get worse. And that's where it was frustrating for me, was to watch these guys seemingly regress. And then against Rutgers, who actually is a half decent defensive front seven, see a bunch of young guys thrust out there because of the flu playing okay, made it even more frustrating because it's like, all right, clearly these backups are capable. Why couldn't we have seen them earlier? But, all of that's off-season fodder filler conversation. But yeah, it's going to come down to the offensive line. It's like we've said, it's the most important, other than quarterback, it's the most important position in football is up in the trenches. And Penn State's got a lot of work ahead of them this offseason with the offensive line.
No doubt. And you mentioned Brenton Strange, which also brings me to another disappointing position on the offensive side of the ball, which was the tight ends. Going into this season, we were all pretty gung ho about Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson being a dynamite 1-2 tandem. And while they both had their moments in the sun, there was certainly a lack of consistency as far as being pass catching threats, or even helping align with blocking. And I guess a lot of blame is for that's been going on first year coach Ty Howell, who was promoted from, I believe he was a grad assistant.
Yeah, he was a grad assistant.
Got promoted to his position after Tyler Bowen left to join the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I believe Bowen, I don't know if it's official, but I believe Brent Pry hired him at Virginia Tech to be their offensive coordinator. So
I'm pretty certain it is official. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain the move. I think once Urban Meyer was shown the door, that's when Bowen didn't bother to stick around and finish you out in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I don't blame anyone who didn't bother to finish out the season in Jacksonville at that rate. But good on him. But unfortunately, thus far, the returns are not good for Ty Howell. Maury, do you think it's because Ty's just simply not ready to be a position coach, at least not at the Power 5 level? Or do you think there's some other things? Maybe we were just hyping up Brenton and Theo a little too much and should have tempered our expectations more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, I do put a lot of the blame at the feet of Ty Howell. Like you said, maybe he's not ready for this yet at the Power 5 level. It's tough to see. For those who are listening, maybe don't know, Ty Howell was a 2 or 3 year starter for Penn State on the offensive line in the mid 2010s. So, he's a Penn State guy through and through, and you'd love to see him do well. But man, it's just that tight end room's got so much talent. I can't. I mean, even Tyler Warren might prove to be the best of three potentially. So there's so much talent in that tight end room that the struggles from them this year truly were inexcusable. I mean, it's not even like running back where, yeah, Penn State had more talent than we saw in the field, but with the offensive line struggles, that factors in. But there were a lot of games this year too where poor blocking by the tight ends played a big role in the running game struggling. So I do put a lot of blame at the feet of Ty Howell for the struggles of the tight. I mean, you have to, whenever you're a position coach and your position struggles, right or wrong, you're going to take the heat for that. Because if something's not working, it's your job to find the answers. It's your job to find the fixes. So, yeah, that'll be another thing to examine this offseason. I don't think James Franklin moves on from Ty Howell after just one season, especially with how well he has done on the recruiting trail for Penn State. But at the same time, and I think it might be yesterday or the day before in our Black Sheet Irish Slack channel, we discussed this, that between, Jesse James, followed by Mike Gesicki, followed by Pat Fryermuth, tight end's kind of one of those positions at Penn State that just recruits itself at this point. So, you don't want to take anything away from the guy on the trail. Yeah, similar to running back with Saquon and then Miles Sanders and then Journey Brown. So you don't want to take anything away from the guy on the recruiting trail, but odds are Penn State's going to recruit well tight end no matter who the tight ends coach is. So, if they're going to continue to struggle to produce, that's where you might look into seeing a coaching change there.
Yeah, I think I would be a little surprised if. Now, I should say we've seen, as much we talk as we say, James Franklin's loyal to a fault. It seems that applies more to players,
yes,
as opposed to coaches, because we've seen him, Kirk Shiraka given the hook after 1 year. Well, to be fair, it's because Mike Yurcich became available, but just 1 year in a COVID year to boot. Kirk Shiraka gets the boot. Before that, David Corley, wide receivers coach in 2018. After that unit struggled so much with drops, he was shown a door after just one season. So
Don't forget the Phil Galliano experience, baby.
Yeah, Phil, all right, of course. I had successfully blocked that out of my mind until you mentioned that.
I mean, even to an extent, when Ricky Ronnie left for Old Dominion, there was some smoke and rumors on the interwebs that James was kind of helping him potentially find a little bit of a soft landing spot where he was maybe not necessarily going to fire him, but was okay with him moving on also. So, like you said, the loyalty definitely seems to apply to players more than coaches.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case with Ronnie. But yeah, I forgot 2018 is also when they had Galliano, who I'm thinking he probably did a similar thing for him with I think he went to the Saints.
He somehow wound up. He coached the worst special teams unit I have ever seen in my entire life, and somehow parlayed that into an NFL job. I think that was more of James making some phone calls to people he knew, and him just being a good human being, making sure the guy was going to land on his feet.
Pretty much, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it wouldn't be out of character for him to make a change, to say to Ty, look, I just don't think you're ready for this yet. We're going to make a change. A tight end coaching position, but like I said, I think, I mean, if he is, I'm not sure if there'll be any changes to the staff at this point, unless say there's heavy rumors that Joe Lorig is gonna become Oregon's special teams coach for new head coach Dan Lanning. So we could be finding ourselves going through a coaching search fund this offseason still. But nothing official as of right now. There is a possibility, I guess, with Troutwine and maybe Lester and Howell, but I'll be surprised if it does happen. I think they both get another year now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're both on thin ice at this point. And I guess they'll and I guess I'm seeing comments here, about I've seen several Franklin comments, which I think probably a good transition to our next topic. We kind of discussed this ad nauseum, I think, already in this show about the 10-year extension and really what it's really all about. It's not so much about getting Franklin more money. He only got like a modest salary bump out of it, but it was really more so he could write a blank. He basically has a blank check to hire whoever he wants when it comes to filling his assistant slots, which is how we got Manny Diaz coaching the defense. I mean, a guy like him does not come cheap, to put it lightly. I wouldn't be surprised if he's probably making like $1.5 million to coach the defense at Penn State. And I think also we've touched on needing to improve facilities, getting especially those athlete dorms. The fact that the players still have apartments, which have been around since the 80s, is kind of a joke when you look at what other programs like Georgia, not even like the elite programs, but even just like programs that maybe historically are not as successful as Penn State have for the athletes. So things like that. And you may be wondering, okay, well, how does that help, teams play better? Well, it doesn't, but what it does is it gives you a better shot at getting some more elite recruits who come to Penn State a few times. They're really liking the place. They like the staff. Things seem to be trending in the right direction. But then they take one visit to Georgia, for example, or just any program that's got nice facilities, nice dorms for the athletes, and all of a sudden those crystal balls start flipping in the other direction. It's that. It's also hiring analysts, behind the scenes people. I mean, recruiting, you think it's just the assistants that go in. I mean, you got a whole staff of desk jockeys that are handling all the behind the scenes stuff on recruiting, and then analysts. All the top programs hire dozens of these folks, and that's really what's in this extension. It's money and a commitment from the university to getting those things in place, which can, help elevate that program to that next level, and obviously take it out of this, this current 2-year run of mediocrity they've been having. But you did make an interesting point in the Slack channel. I think one of our colleagues, Adam Collier, mentioned it, but let's say next year if Penn State you know, wins like 5 or 6 games, you know, what happens then? And I think you said something like, I mean, obviously there's some people already in the fan base that are already done with Franklin, but you could have perhaps even more people just start to lose faith, lose interest, and then you find yourself in a weird situation where you've had 3 straight years mediocrity, and now maybe 2023 might be looking pretty good, but you've got that cloud hanging over you, but yet you're in a place where you're in no danger of getting fired either. It's just an awkward situation. So I guess my question to you, Mari, is what would it take? What kind? And you don't have to necessarily put a wins number, but what would it take, you think, to get some of those fans who are hoping maybe Franklin would move on to another job to actually get a little confidence back?
I mean, I think that's where it's tough because you look at next year and you say, let they go 9-3, which on paper looks great. But let's say if you're 9-3, those 3 losses, once again being Ohio State, Michigan State, it's going to be a lot of the same. Well, here we go again. They still can't get over that hump. They still can't beat Ohio State and the Michigan schools consistently. But if you go 9-3, but let's say you stumble out of the gates and lose to Purdue and Auburn, but then you bounce back and go 2-1 against Ohio State and the Michigan schools, that 9-3 obviously gets viewed much differently because not only do you finish the season strong, you get 2 wins over, those 3 teams that you're always competing with at the top of the Big Ten. So I think a lot of it's going to hinge more on who they beat more so than how many games they win. I definitely think next year there's no room for error, though, when it comes to the Illinois and Indianas and Marylands of the world. I think, they've got to take care of business against Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers. They get Illinois and Minnesota in crossover games. I think they absolutely need to win. And even their other non-con games outside of Auburn, Ohio, and Central Michigan are 2 games you got to take care of business in. I think that's going to be the biggest thing because what you were referencing to in the Slack channel, like I said, if they come out next year and go 7-5 again, something like that, man, this fan base is going to be livid. Most of this fan base is going to be livid. And you start to gamble on the apathy setting in, which is never good for anything, especially because, like you said, James Franklin isn't going anywhere, at least for 2 to 3 years with that contract extension that he just got. So I think the biggest thing is, like I said, not necessarily how many games you win, but who you beat. Because I know, I'm sure anyone agrees with me, I would much rather go 9-3 with a loss at Auburn and say a loss at Purdue, but you get 2 out of 3 against Ohio State and Michigan State, then going 9-3 where you beat everybody that you should beat and maybe win a couple of those toss-up games like Auburn and Purdue, but then you come out and get swept again by the Big 3. So that to me is where I think it's going to hinge on more of who they beat than anything else. And also, real quick, we do have some breaking news here. As I know we mentioned earlier was expected, but Jesse Luketa has officially declared for the NFL draft, so he will not be back next season for the Nittany Lions.
Well, best of luck to Jesse. Hopefully he will crush in the league. But yeah, I do think make a point, Mari. It's going to depend on, may not necessarily on the record, but who they beat to get that record. And obviously, just say yes, no losing to Illinois. You absolutely cannot have an Illinois type loss next season. So you got to take care of them. Got to take care of Maryland and Minnesota, both at home. Of course, you got your games. You got Central Michigan at home. Got to take care of that. And Ohio. Those probably sacrifices. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But of course, you'd like to see them. I'm assuming for now, if they start off on the road at Purdue, get that dub at Purdue. That's not going to be. That'll that'll be a tough game. Again, it's not. I wouldn't say it's as daunting as going on the road at Wisconsin was this year, but that's still going to be a tough opener. Especially they got their quarterback Aiden O'Connell coming back for a 6th year, and despite not having their best offensive and defensive guys playing, they still won a fun shootout in the Music City Bowl against Tennessee. So they can be a dangerous team. And then at Auburn, that's gonna be an interesting game, I guess. I know with Bo Nix grad transferring, I don't know how their quarterback situation is going to look for next year. I guess having Tank Bigsby stay is big for them, though. I know he was initially going to throw his name in the portal, but it sounds like he's sticking. So I'm sure they'll be riding the Tank a good amount next year. But if they can go into Jordan Hare Stadium and pull off I guess we'll call it an upset. I'm assuming the odds makers will probably favor Auburn in that one. If they can go in there and get the win, I mean that would be a nice momentum booster early in the season. Like you said, if hopefully they break up the Ohio State Michigan back-to-back weeks, but obviously you'd love to see them beat one of those teams. And then of course there's Michigan State, which frankly that's a game that still kind of infuriates me. I think if they had just maybe gone full air raid even in the snow, they could have won that game. Alas, they didn't. So yeah, it's just like I said, take care of the games you absolutely should win, like Illinois, and then knock off one of those big 3 teams in your conference, and heck, you go get a win. You can get a win on the road at Auburn or yes, winning at Purdue to open the season would be nice. It would be a nice start to the season, even though maybe it's not like beating Wisconsin on the road was, but it's going to be a big thing. But yeah, it's definitely going to be. It's definitely going to be a kind of a crossroads type of season, at least just given how these last couple of years have gone. And I will say, I think even 9-3 and losing to the to Michigan State, and Ohio State would probably still be a step up from what we saw this year, because at least you're still beating all the teams you should beat, and maybe that you're in toss-ups with, which they didn't do this year. But maybe that's a discussion we can have in the Slack channel. We can just go on forever about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That would definitely be a step up over this season. I mean, obviously 7 wins and 9 wins is an upgrade, but yeah, it's getting to the point where James Franklin needs to start beating those 3 more consistently. I mean, Ohio State's a little bit of a different monster for a lot of reasons, obviously. Another thing I think that made this season frustrating was prior to this season, they appeared to finally be turning a corner against the Michigan schools. Coming into this year, they had won 4 of their last 5 against Michigan and 3 of their last 5 against Michigan State. So they did appear to finally be getting the ship righted against those 2. And then this year happened where they lost both of them. And like you said, the Michigan State game, if they just would have committed to that passing game, they'd probably win it. In the Michigan game, there's one of about 46 different plays I could point to that had they gone in Penn State's favor, they probably would have won. That was another game they easily could have, if not should have won. So that just makes it even more frustrating. Those games are there for the taking this year.
Well, speaking of Ohio State, they are getting waxed a little right now by Utah. It's 14-0 Utah, late first quarter in the Rose Bowl.
This is pretty wonderful to watch. It's a great way to cap off. I mean, I know I went on a big Twitter rant about this the other day, but and maybe this is just me having grown up in Big Ten country. I still think the Rose Bowl is special. It is by far the greatest bowl game, in my opinion. I think it is maybe the best sporting event in all of American sports. So I always love the Rose Bowl, and watching Ohio State get their teeth kicked in the Rose Bowl just makes it even better.
Yeah, it's with the caveat, of course. I think their best 2 receivers have opted out: Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, and Wilson, yeah.
So and of course, I actually did in my bold prediction pool, confidence pool, I should say. I picked Utah. I figured they would be the more motivated team in this one. I mean, this is the biggest game really in Utah football history. I mean, they probably got the majority of fans.
And as I said, the Utes have been playing some really good football too. They're definitely a team where if this year had a 12-team playoff, Utah would be in it. Obviously, having won the Pac-12, and I know I would not want to have to deal with Utah
They
right now.
would be, and I'll tell you what, I think I know we're delving now into, but you know what? I think we've talked about everything Penn State when we can at this point. But going on to playoff stuff, I do think the 12 people say, oh, we shouldn't expand to 12. It's going to like, I don't know. I would have fun seeing how much damage Utah could do in a 12-team playoff. I mean, you're
Yeah,
talking about those Cinderella teams in March Madness. I mean, it could be a pseudo version of that.
it would remind me a lot of, you get one of those NFL teams that gets hot down the stretch, just barely sneaks into the last wild
Yes,
card.
that's actually a better analogy.
As someone who has lived in the Pittsburgh area my entire life, the 2006 Steelers, where they were I think 6-6 or something, and then just got red hot, got the last wild card spot, did not lose again, and won the Super Bowl. Like something like that, where a team just is playing great football at the right time and is super confident. And, anyone who's played sports out there will tell you sometimes the confidence is the hardest thing in the world to beat. If you go up against a team that's confident, even if you're more talented, that confidence can carry them.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know when we're going to get this 12-team playoff. They keep seeing reports like, oh, maybe it'll happen as soon as 2023, but now it's on pause, or at least they're going to wait till middle of this decade because they're working out a TV deal. I mean, it's gonna obviously whenever it does expand, it's not going to be exclusively for ESPN. I'm sure. I would think Fox, maybe even CBS get a piece of the pie for the early round games. Let's just say, probably the semifinal final would still be on ESPN, but yeah, at the very least, you have other networks getting involved
Mhm.
with a bigger playoff. So,
Absolutely. I mean, look at the NFL. They have what games on what? Fox, CBS, ESPN, ABC. Why wouldn't college football want to do the same and maximize their profits?
well, someone points out, but all but one or two of the bowl games currently are on the ESPN family of networks. And one of them was just going to be streaming on Barstool, which is not even like a TV thing. So that's then the other one was the Sun Bowl on CBS. So,
There was the game, NC State and UCLA. I forgot bowl game there. I think it was Holiday Bowl. It was
or
supposed
I
to be
guess three.
that was another one that COVID took out. So
Yeah, I guess COVID took out the two of the three that were going to be on a non-ESPN network. Only the Sun Bowl ended up actually airing. So, yeah,
probably an evil empire joke about ESPN spreading COVID in there or something to make, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
probably. But anyway, Marty, any final thoughts before we head into the off season?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I said, it's one of those seasons. The circle back to the very beginning of the show, as bad as it may sound, it's kind of nice to have it over. This was a season that went from looking like to be maybe one of the best ones of the James Franklin era to one that just went up in flames and fast. And honestly, the last 2 months of the season got to the point where there were a lot of days these games were tough to watch. And I know you and I have many conversations with others in the Slack channel where it's like, if we weren't having to cover this game for Black Shoe Diaries or you and I with our post game show here, we probably wouldn't have watched some of them unfold. But yeah, no, it's nice to have it over, and as frustrating as it can be, like I said, you look at the Outback Bowl, a lot of the guys that they're going to look to play bigger roles next year stepped up and played a good game. There's a terrific recruiting class coming in. They're off to a good start in the portal with Mitchell Tinsley. I expect them to continue to hit the portal hard. And yeah, I think, I forget who it was that said this after the game. I think it might have been Ellie in the Slack channel, that it seems like when he's been at Penn State, when James Franklin has done his best is when his back's been against the wall. His back is certainly against the wall right now. So, it was that way in 2016. It was that way to a lesser extent in 2019. And he always comes out swinging. So maybe that'll work in Penn State's favor, that he all of a sudden does have his back against the wall a little bit.
So James Franklin's kind of like you and I. We do our best work when our backs are against the wall and
Exactly.
it's pressure on us. So, but anyway, thanks for all you who tuned in. Once again, if you like what we've seen, please like and subscribe on the Penn State channel and the Big Ten channel here on the Voice of College Football, Mark Rogers TV. Hope you're all having a wonderful 2022 so far. As far as offseason plans for us, if there's any between now and the spring game, if there's any major breaking news, regarding, I guess, coaching staff changes or maybe some big pickups in the portal, what have you, Mari and I could do a quick video on that. Uh, Otherwise, for the spring game, spring practice began around March. The blue white game is in April. I forget what day in April. I think the 24th. Sorry, 23rd, I believe. One of the last Saturdays of April. But we'll do some videos. It's like a position preview for blue white, and so we'll have some videos here and there throughout the off season. So it's not like this is the last time we're doing this until post game for Purdue, or if they change the schedule, maybe it'll be someone else. But the first post
revenge game to start the year.
Yeah, there we go. That would be nice. But anyway, we thank you all for tuning in this season. I think Marty and I, and also Ellie, Jared, and anyone else who got involved here from Black Diaries, we all had a blast doing it. We hope you enjoyed our content throughout the season, and we look forward to seeing more of you in 2022.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for following along all year.